Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being with us. We'll have a chance to introduce ourselves individually here in a few moments. I understand everybody from the Wisconsin team is here. I'm excited for the team from Wisconsin to be here. I lived in Badgerland for 7 years. Um, it's I was a dad, and our two boys who are now college-age sons were both little guys back then. So we're glad to have you all. My name is Kevin Harrington. I lead R&D for the home care business, part of urology and critical care at Becton Dickinson. I live in Atlanta. I'd like to go ahead and ask the other judges to introduce themselves, and then would ask the Wisconsin team to introduce themselves as well. Maria, can you start us off?
I'd be happy to. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maria Sonnen, and I am the ethics program manager for a sector within BAE Systems, Inc. BAE Systems is one of the largest defense contractors in the United States. And I have been here for about 3 years. Prior to that, I spent time at the ECOA, now the ECI, where I was fortunate enough to meet Tom White and experience IBEC. That's probably about 10 years ago. So it is really something I look forward to every year. I find the presentations and the students to be absolutely fabulous. So glad to be here, and best of luck to all of you.
Excellent. Carl?
Hi there, I'm Carl Oliver, and I'm retired from the Northrop Grumman Ethics Office. I've been judging IBEC for, this is my 19th year, I think. I lose count a little bit. Had to take my shoes off to get to that number.
Really good. Thomas?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tom Dowd. I'm a retired corporate executive, spending 25 years primarily with the Healthcare Corporation of America in a number of marketing roles. I then moved on to teaching, which I enjoyed very much, and I've been retired a couple of years, which I also enjoyed very much. So I'm happy to be here and looking forward to the case conference.
Excellent. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Carl. Thanks, Maria. Can the Wisconsin team introduce yourselves?
I'm Christopher. I'm a sophomore at Wisconsin Madison, and I'm studying mathematics.
Hello, I'm Aiden. I'm a sophomore at UW Madison as well, studying computer science.
Really good.
Hello, I'm Nora. I'm a freshman at UW Madison, and I'm studying finance.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Maya. I'm a sophomore at UW Madison, and I'm studying philosophy.
Excellent. Thanks for being here. Thanks for participating. Just be conscious of your volume. Y'all are a little on the quiet side. So if as we kind of talk through and go through things, I'm going to read just sort of a short introduction, so if everybody's grounded in kind of how we'll proceed. I'll also keep time as we continue through the simulation. So we're in the full presentation portion. In this part of the competition, you are taking on a fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to the four of us, your judges. Please make sure everyone knows who you are and who they are before you begin. You'll have 25 minutes with a 5-minute cushion to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all 3 counts. During this time, teams will be uninterrupted. When you are finished, the judges will ask you questions for about 20 minutes. During the Q&A, both you and the judges will stay in character consistent with the simulation. After the Q&A, the judges will give you feedback outside the role playing. Some important things to keep in mind. The ethical aspects of your analysis are the most important part. However, these should be described in a simple, practical, common sense fashion. Using technical philosophical terminology or basing your argument on religious or theological grounds will be considered a serious weakness. During this presentation, every member of the team must have some sort of speaking role. So again, we'll begin in a few moments. I'll keep an eye on time. When we conclude, we'll have questions and then we'll kind of debrief out of character from there. So for the folks from the team, are you all ready to begin? Very good. Please go ahead.
Hello, we are Badger Consulting Agency, an ethical-based consulting firm out of Madison, Wisconsin, and we're delighted to be presenting to you the Apple Board of Directors. Let's first preface that Apple has two significant problems to address. First is the problem of transparency, and second is the problem of reliance when it comes to the disposal of electronic waste. We believe establishing a transparent, closed-loop recycling process will solve these problems. Before we continue, let us define two key terms. E-waste is otherwise known as electronic waste and is becoming a more pressing issue globally. Second, a closed loop can be defined as utilizing processes to extract leftover value from products like Apple iPhones to minimize waste and maximize profits. More electronic waste is being produced each year, and in fact, this electronic waste is being sent to developing countries. This is an issue for electronic manufacturers like Apple that needs to be addressed in the present to present problems in the future. Their disposal has lasting repercussions on the environment and contracted workers that are receiving this waste. These current practices are not only unethical and untransparent, but unsustainable due to national legislation that will be passed in the coming years. Therefore, we propose before the Apple Board of Directors why it is in your best interest to create a transparent and closed-loop recycling process that contrasts their services. In this presentation, we hope for you to understand what a transparent closed-loop recycling process might look like and why it is necessary ethically, financially, and legally. First, let me present an agenda of what we will discuss. First, Maya will lay out the ethical framework for why it benefits all stakeholders for using the solution. Second, Christopher will discuss the environmental and physical harms of Apple and their e-waste under the current business model. Third, Christopher will discuss the proposed solution to create the closed-loop recycling plant. Fourth, Nora will discuss the financial incentive to be contractors for electronic waste. And I will lastly discuss the legal implications if Apple were not to use our solution in the coming years.
To begin with the ethical framework, we propose that the purpose of a corporation is to create value to all stakeholders. We define stakeholder as any group that is vital to the survival and success of the corporation. Examples of stakeholders include customers, employees, shareholders, and suppliers. In the past, businesses were thought only to prioritize shareholders, but changes in law and economic constraints shows that this perspective has been undermined. To begin with a legal argument, businesses do not have a legal obligation to maximize profits. This is seen in changes with consumer rights, the rights of employees, and the interests of the local community. For consumer rights, Greenman v. Yuba Power shows that manufacturers have strict liability for the damage caused by their products, even if it's out of their hands. The Consumer Product Safety Commission also has the power to enact product recalls and requires transparency about a product's ingredients. Second, the rights of employees have been further solidified. The National Labor Relations Act gives employees the right to bargain and unionize, as well as the emergence of other administrative case law and settlement of discrimination claims with large employers, which necessitate that the corporation recognizes employee rights. Third, the interests of local communities are prioritized by law. The Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act constrain corporations from spoiling the commons. And Marsh v. Alabama prioritizes rights of local citizens while negating property rights of the firm. Changes in law have given rights to groups that have a claim on the corporation, in a way forcing the corporation to include them more. This results in the necessary prioritization of all stakeholders instead of just shareholders. For the economic argument, prioritizing the pursuit of profit over everything else does not create the greatest good for the greatest number. This is because of externalities and monopolies. Externalities are when corporations externalize costs on the environment, and therefore the real cost is not apparent. and the environment is negatively impacted. Monopolies are when corporations grow too large and have the power to set prices much higher than the real cost, and without this real cost, the consumers are negatively impacted. Because the real cost is not reflected in the price of the product, the greatest good is not realized. Due to these legal and economic constraints, companies have no obligation to prioritize shareholder value over stakeholder value for all other stakeholder groups. Following this ethical framework also directly benefits Apple. First, Apple's shareholders are stakeholders as well. So a stakeholder framework ensures that their interests are maximized. By maximizing good for all stakeholders, Apple benefits financially by fostering credible commitments, promoting transparency and reliability, benefiting consumers and shareholders, as well as business sustainability, which ensures that business can run smoothly in the future, aiding employees, suppliers, and shareholders. Apple also can be helped by acting along their mission and accomplishing their goals through the stakeholder framework. Apple has recognized that the short-term profit is not sustainable due to environmental concerns, and that investing in the environment promotes longevity and benefits in the long run. It has a plan to become a closed-loop manufacturer that does not rely on the mining industry, as well as the implementation of a completely carbon-neutral supply chain by 2030. Tim Cook, Apple CEO, has stated, "Businesses have a profound opportunity to help build a more sustainable future, one born out of our common concern for the planet we share." The stakeholder framework aligns with Apple's goals because the environment affects all stakeholders.
All right, so now that we have an idea of the sort of framework by which we judge whether the current situation is ethical, I want to weigh out why we think that the status quo has harms and why we need to change what's happening right now. So like Aiden sort of pointed out earlier on, in the status quo, the majority of e-waste right now is processed or recycled in developing countries. The result of this means that effectively developed countries are producing a lot of electronics, and then once those electronics reach the end of their life cycles, they're sent off to the developing countries. In other words, effectively what's happening now is a sort of offshoring of responsibility, where developed countries push off all of the hard and dangerous labor into the developing world. We think this is wrong for a number of reasons. In particular, though, I want to highlight the conditions faced, particularly by workers and communities near these plants. So before I get into the specifics that are outlined on this slide, I just want to outline that the picture here is from a plant in Accra, Ghana, or right outside Accra, Ghana. Plants are not only across Africa and in other places of the developed world, but also specifically in China, where a large majority, particularly Guiyu, which I believe is the largest processing plant, many of these are located in China as well. So number of places that these are located. But we think that the current situation is harmful for a number of reasons. The first is the World Health Organization outlines that at the status quo, a lot of child labor is being used at these sites. And the problem with this, there are a number of problems with this. Not only is the fact that children are working arguably right there a violation of human rights, but in addition, you have more utilitarian or just impacts where, you know, children aren't getting their proper education, they're exposed to dangerous chemicals. We think that if you consider these children contract workers, which as we'll show later, we believe they are, then we don't think that Apple, you guys are doing an effective job at making sure that all of your stakeholders, including your employees and contract employees, are being treated fairly. In addition to this, we find that the average wages at many of these processing plants is something on the order of 15 to 20 cents per hour. And given the enormous profits that these technology companies, including yourselves, are taking in, we think it's important that, in other words, we don't think that this is a fair allocation of resources for the amount of dangerous work that's being done by these employees. So we think, again, that these employees are being harmed. And again, that's a violation of the sort of stakeholder model that we outlined earlier. And finally, all of this is compounded by the fact that these processing plants, because there's not significant environmental or labor regulations, there's the toxic chemicals contained in the e-waste are causing a lot of problems. In particular, they're causing health problems. In particular, I believe cancers and birth defects are being caused significantly. But in addition to this, they're also harming the environment. So not only are you hurting the health of the workers who you're contracting out, but additionally, you're harming their communities by effectively poisoning the environment. So why do we think Apple is responsible? After all, there's nothing that explicitly says that Apple is directly contracting out to these places in China and in Ghana and elsewhere. But there are really two sort of clues that make it very clear that it's very, very difficult for Apple to be doing anything else. And it's not necessarily your fault. You might be doing everything right. Let's say everything is right. Everything is domestic processing of this e-waste. You do everything you possibly can to avoid sending any of the e-waste overseas. The problem is that there's a significant issue with trafficking and with sort of illegal backdoor deals regarding this e-waste, particularly amongst domestic suppliers. A study done by Renee Cho of the Earth Institute at Columbia actually outlines the specific numbers, saying that 40% of the e-waste supposedly recycled in the United States was actually exported predominantly to China and predominantly to these kinds of low regulation facilities. So in other words, best case scenario, you guys are doing everything in your power to keep this domestic supply, trying to keep good regulations. You're still likely seeing about 40% of your e-waste going overseas to these dangerous places. In addition, though, if you look at the contract list of Apple, which we did, the first contractor that comes up is the Li Tong Group, which is based in Hong Kong. And the issue here is Hong Kong is the major place in which e-waste is trafficked into Asia. So if your major contractor is based in Hong Kong, where much of this trafficking occurs, then that's a big red flag, and it leads us reason to believe that potentially even more than that 40% is going to these locations. So overall, there are really two main harms that are happening here. The first is this idea of greenwashing, which is a neologism based off of whitewashing. And so the argument is that Apple is promoting a humane green public image right now. You want to go carbon neutral by 2030, and you want to create this sort of closed system. You're not using these conflict minerals. You're trying to recycle all of your minerals so you're not doing dangerous mining. You're promoting this sort of image of a humane green company. But at the same time, you're sort of abdicating responsibility for all of this electronic waste, and you're outsourcing it to a lot of these dangerous areas where people are being harmed significantly. So as a result, we think that despite promoting this image, behind the scenes, you're sort of promoting these harms. And the sort of analogy is you could go carbon neutral by 2030, but if all of this stuff is being contracted out, the entire system is not really carbon neutral. And so it's a somewhat dishonest system. And so we think that what Apple needs to do is they need to find a way to more completely fulfill their pledges and ambitions. We think that you guys have good pledges, but we think you guys need to be more complete at fulfilling those goals. Additionally, I want to bring this back to the stakeholder theory we brought up earlier. We also think that many stakeholders are being harmed, in particular workers, the environment, communities near these plants. And so we also think that Apple needs to find a way to ensure that contract workers, consumers, and the environment see their needs met. So how are we going to do this? The way we're going to do this is a 4-step plan, and it's a general proposal in order to tackle these two problems. So our proposal is fundamentally based on transparency and self-reliance. It's based on transparency because that's a major problem right now. And we want to make sure that Apple knows where the e-waste is going, knows how it's being processed, and can verify that human rights are not being violated, labor rights are not being violated, environmental rights are not being violated. We also think self-reliance is important because as the Columbia evidence shows, right now, it's almost impossible to verify that any third-party contractor is actually going to be doing what you expect them to do. In other words, these third-party contractors are not reliable. So we're going to institute a 4-step plan for Apple, where Apple is effectively going to be doing the recycling themselves. So the first step in this plan is to partner with well-known international verifiers. The group that we think makes the most sense here is the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. The reason why this group makes a lot of sense is their fundamental purpose is to promote environmentally sound e-waste recycling and to help developing countries do so responsibly, helping workers. We think that United will be happy to partner with Apple. They have partnerships with other companies and groups, And we think that they'll be happy to partner with Apple because it's in their best interest. It gives them a lot more of a public image and a lot more sort of momentum behind their ideas and some weight behind what they're trying to accomplish. So the next 3 steps of the plan are going to be, once you partnered with Unido, we think for the second step is going to be to use the factories they've already built. So Unido has built factories that are sustainable, factories that promote environmental and labor rights. They've done so in Uganda and they've done so in Latin America. And so we think that because these factories are already built, if Apple, once you get a partnership with Unido, you can send a lot of your e-waste through these factories and process this waste by 2023. We don't think it's going to take more than a couple of years to start that process. Once you've done that, we think that if you need more factories, we would suggest building new factories in the next 2 years by 2025. And then finally, once you've sort of established an infrastructure to process all of your electronic waste, the 4th step in the plan is to use this infrastructure to turn a profit on the side for the economic help. Because effectively, you're going to be having drives for these phones. You'll take in phones and electronics and recycle them, but it's not going to be constant. There's going to be spikes. There's going to be downturns in terms of the amount that you're bringing in. And so there's going to be opportunities to take in more waste because the factories simply aren't being used. So there's no cost to you, but you can also charge other companies to have them send you their e-waste for you to process it. And so it gives you a sort of new sort of industry to expand into that we think is an important industry, as we'll outline later. And so the final sort of impact of this is we also think that there's ways to sort of establish legitimacy with the whole greenwashing idea, which we'll also discuss later. But we think that one of the examples of an award that Apple could pick up for such an activity is the Unido Goodwill Ambassadorship, which they give to companies and people who promote their core values. And we think that Apple partnering with Unido would result in an award like this. But just to generally summarize all of this, the fundamental idea is Apple is having a problem right now. Their stakeholders they're not valuing all of their stakeholders equally. There are employees and such who are not being fairly treated, contract employees. And so we think in order to solve this and to solve the image problem, Apple needs to invest in the developing world and start building these factories and using these factories. We think that A, will take care of all of the labor and environmental harms because you have this strict transparency. You're working with a United Nations group who's going to make sure that no sort of labor or environmental harms are occurring. But then also we think that accolades like this Goodwill Ambassadorship and more attention to these beneficial projects will also help Apple make sure that they're standing up to their promises and your guys' promises and your mission statement, so that the greenwashing harms, which we'll discuss later, aren't going to establish themselves.
By implementing our proposed solution, Apple could gain economic and financial benefits in 2 ways, through consumer response and contracting out services. A key term in consumer response is greenwashing. Greenwashing is defined as the act of misleading consumers regarding the environmental practices of a company or the environmental benefits of a product or service. Pretty much many companies use greenwashing as a strategy to appeal to the environmental concerns that have been rising within consumers. However, as consumers are becoming more aware and more educated about the environmental effects, they are realizing that these companies are launching very surface level initiatives. And when they do launch these initiatives, consumers are usually overloaded with vague, ambiguous, and sometimes inaccurate information about these initiatives. And as a result, greenwashing negatively impacts the market demand by confusing consumers, which ultimately results in low green trust. In other words, greenwashing results in consumers being less and less willing to believe that these companies are truly benefiting the environment. And to sum all of this up, greenwashing should not be implemented through these companies, and Apple has been seen to greenwash, and we are urging you to abandon your greenwashing strategies and to start being more transparent with your consumers, as you will gain many benefits that I will discuss soon. On the other side, Apple will also be contracting out their services once they implement their full cycle. So 1 pound of electric waste could be could cost about 20 to 40 cents per pound. And just in 2019 alone, about 7 million metric tons of e-waste was produced. So if Apple got their hands on just even 1% of the e-waste produced, they would generate about $46 million in revenue. Additionally, the global e-waste recycling market was valued at $1.2 million in 2017 and is projected to be 1.9 million in 2025. That's a 70% growth in 8 years. Imagine what a couple of decades could do. It is in your best interest to implement our proposed solution because you could gain a competitive advantage in the tech industry by, one, meeting market expectations by gaining consumer trust as opposed to them not trusting your other competitors. B, you will also be avoiding the risk of reputational damage. And most importantly, by being self-reliant, you'll be ahead of other tech industries and even potentially have your competitors rely on your recycling plants. And another economic gain is you will be gaining another revenue stream.
As Noor described, creating these ethical recycling plants makes financial sense. But it's also important to note the legal implications that do if they don't. As of right now, Apple practically has no legislation to worry about on e-waste in the United States and including the European Union. But in the future, Apple will need to worry about complying with more stringent legislation on e-waste from both of these countries and nations. Apple is best advised to comply with these regulations now by creating ethical recycling plants to avoid a financial loss in the future. Overall, the legislation in the United States on e-waste is abysmal. There is currently no law that requires e-waste recycling or prohibits e-waste from being exported to other countries. The Resource Conservation Recovery Act in 1976 only restricts cathode ray tubes, which is no longer used in modern Apple products. Even at that, the statewide legislation does little to nothing. There's 25 states that have enacted laws about recycling, but they only primarily outline a framework for these recyclers, or they force manufacturers of electronics like Apple to make the recycling accessible to their users. This only accounts for roughly 22% of the total electronic waste in the United States. But there's actual legislation that is being proposed, though not yet passed, that will become problematic in the United States, especially on the exportation of waste. In 2013, the Responsible Electronic Recycling Act was proposed to prohibit the export of electronic waste to countries not members of the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development or the European Union. And they would establish criminal penalties for these companies for knowingly exporting restricted electronic waste. Clearly, this would exclude China, where a significant portion of Apple's e-waste goes to, as Christopher described earlier. Similar legislation has also been proposed, but not passed due to security threats of sending electronic waste to areas like China and other developing countries. Another piece of legislation that keeps reappearing in the House is SERA, or the Secure E-Waste Export and Recycling Act. It has been proposed in 2010, 2013, 2016, and 2019. This is bipartisan legislation to stop the flow of electronic waste to China and other countries that counterfeit American technology. It is intended to ensure that this e-waste does not become the source of counterfeit products back in the United States. This legislation is intended to grow the domestic recycling industry in the United States by providing jobs and reduce the unsafe disposal of e-waste abroad. In 2019, it has passed the House, but has failed to pass the Senate. Clearly, the United States legislative body is taking notice on the exportation of e-waste and recycling e-waste. For these ideas to be proposed year after year indicates largely where the US legislative body will eventually be going, a place with more stringent environmental regulations. In the event of a passage, Apple will be financially stunned to find new recyclers. The event of a passage is not just a maybe, but a certainty. One of these key indicators is the United States precedent to follow the European Union in terms of environmental legislation. One of the key environmental legislations is the EU's the WEEE, or the Waste Electrical and Electronic Equipment Regulations. It's a directive to lay down measures to protect the environment and human health to reduce the effects of e-waste. It calls for a wide variety of measures, but there's three most important ones. It states, first, that e-waste can only be exported if the exporter can prove that the recycling took place in conditions equivalent to the recycling conditions in the European Union. For Apple, this will be very hard to prove if enacted, especially in the United States or EU, when they're exporting most of their e-waste to countries like China, as Christopher described earlier, where the conditions are pretty terrible. Secondly, there will also be increased e-waste collection rates. From 2016 to 2019, the minimum collection rate was set to be achieved from 45 to 65% of all electronic waste in the market. Recent studies show that around half of the member countries of the EU were able to reach these targets, but some were simply not able to. This indicates, nonetheless, that Apple will be required to recycle more than ever. Lastly, but most importantly, this directive enables the government to enact penalties. As given in the directive, the penalties provided must be appropriate, effective, proportionate, and dissuasive for those who do not comply with these regulations. While it is vague, it does provide a framework to target exploitative countries. The WEEE is only a directive, so each country has to set out their own regulations to achieve goals set out in these directives. One of the countries that is progressive in terms of legislation is no longer part of the EU, but is the United Kingdom. They added upon the legislation WEEE with one significant update: the distributor take-back system. Retailers like Apple stores will be required as of January 2021 to provide take-back services like drop-off schemes for recycled electronics. Along with increased recycle rates set up by the WEEE, Apple will be receiving more waste than ever before at this point. Having a closed loop will cost less as the supply of waste increases under this type of legislation. Looking into the future, the European Commission will be looking to make more strict initiatives. The European Commission said in 2020, it's going to introduce new waste laws to ensure that Apple's products and other electronic products in the EU market are recyclable, repairable, and designed to last longer. And it also sets out initiatives for 2030 to half the total amount of e-waste in the European Union. But why should Apple and you guys care about this? It's important for Apple to be proactive with upcoming legislation in the EU and legislation that will inevitably follow in the United States. It's only a matter of time. In becoming a closed-loop recycling company, Apple will be less likely to be fined and penalized if their total e-waste production exceeds requirements, as it will be closely managing it in-house. Additionally, Apple will no longer be at risk of penalties or in violation of laws that forbid the exportation of waste abroad. But most importantly, if Apple were to implement our solution now, these processes will be comfortably established without having to frantically change our logistics in the event of sudden legislation, which could end up being catastrophic. Apple needs to start now to be ready in the future.
Apple has already made admirable efforts to prioritize the environment. However, the problem of lack of transparency and hazardous e-waste continue to affect the world. Our proposed solution of partnering with international verifiers and developing closed-loop recycling processes by investing in e-waste recycling through existing infrastructure maximize good for all stakeholders, but especially for Apple. Financially, you benefit from transparency, which gives you a comparative advantage, and profit from competitors by contracting out e-waste services. You're also ready for future environmental regulations and any challenges that could arise. We want there to be an Apple in 50 years. Our solution prioritizes long-run sustainability over short-term profit. Implementing it, you can ensure longevity. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for your presentation. I have a couple of questions I wanted to follow up on. First of all, did you happen to research or are familiar with any statements that may be on Apple's website or other public communication forums specific to their policies and objectives as far as the e-waste issue?
So actually, what was very interesting, so we actually originally were looking into rare earth elements. And so we eventually found that Apple, you guys are actually doing a pretty good job with recycling these rare earth elements. In fact, that's been a major policy change. However, what we found is while there's a lot of efforts to recycle, there doesn't appear to be very many initiatives regarding how the recycling is conducted. And so looking into this deeper, we started to uncover some of these issues. And we became kind of concerned that this was a prevalent issue, not only for Apple, but for the entire industry. So we think you guys have done a great job with sort of outlining, making sure that you're recycling in the first place, which is not a guarantee in today's economy with the way a lot of companies are operating. But we don't think that there's a lot of focus either from Apple or from media or from government on how this recycling is being conducted. And we think that's a problem.
Okay. How about our competitors? Are you familiar or had a chance to research at all how some of our competitors are addressing this issue, which is common to their products as well? Lenovo, for example, used to be IBM, now a Chinese business. How are our competitors managing or addressing these issues?
Again, the same issues that apply to Apple seem to apply to these other companies as well. In particular, sort of the looking into it again, there don't appear to be any significant initiatives by any major electronics producer to significantly change the supply chain. And so as a result of that, the same sort of problems that apply to Apple right now apply to all of your competitors. So the issue of contracting out this e-waste, and then as a result, having the 40% go to overseas, that's a problem that appears to be consistent with all of your competitors. And so we think that taking these sort of steps outlined give you a significant competitive advantage because it doesn't appear that anybody else has done this yet.
In addition to that, one of the phones companies that's in the European Union is called a Fairphone, and they actually released a Fairphone 3, which sets out initiatives like I talked about earlier in the WEEE, where they actually are leading in terms of progressive like supply chain, in that they're actually doing what they're saying and they're being transparent about it. They're recycling at rates that are not seen by other competitors. But it's important to note, unlike Android, unlike Lenovo, unlike Apple, like you guys, that the magnitude at which they're doing it is still pretty small. It's roughly about 500,000 phones, which is pretty much about 1% of the European market. So there is examples of companies trying to do this and being successful, but it's still at a small scale.
So I understand Apple, we have some capacity for making our own products, but many of our products are manufactured by third-party manufacturers. Should Apple's supply chain partners be obligated to the same responsibility and have the same obligations and commitments, or would this just the scope of your recommendations apply just to Apple and our own manufacturing? And what's within the scope of our own manufacturing?
I would like to draw attention to the carbon neutrality initiative that Apple has already put forward by 2030. In that, they state, in their press statement, they state that all parts of their supply chain, they're working to be completely carbon neutral. So their suppliers also, they want to ensure that it's not just their part of the company or of the supply chain, they're part of the process that is affected. It's also in regards to the supply chain. With e-waste recycling specifically, I think the same framework could be applied and ensuring that each part is sustainable.
And I'd just add, I think that could even fit within the framework we've outlined already. Because I do think obviously the first step is to make sure that just the products that Apple is producing, the end products, are being recycled. But once you expand to that fourth step of sort of taking in e-waste from other companies, we think that could also include taking in the e-waste produced by your contractors. So we think that it's not necessarily like a different process. We think it fits within the same process.
Christopher, I like your earlier mention of rare earth elements and their value for Apple, and how, if I follow your research began, specific to other components of what could be recycled. Is the recycling effort something that could eventually be a profitable or cost-effective way for Apple to manufacture and its third-party manufacturers to make our products, or is this going to be a loss leader?
Yeah, we think so. So I think that the big opportunity right here, I know we put it on the slide, but we kind of, I think the e-waste recycling industry, which includes rare earths, which are a predominant component of batteries and other electronic components. Right now, that's like $1.5 million industry. In other words, like 95% of e-waste is not recycled. But there's not really a reason why it can't be. And Apple, what you guys have done to recycle all rare earth elements from batteries, with the battery initiatives show that it is possible to recycle a vast majority of the components. So the reason why we think it's profitable is because nobody else has done this yet. But not only is there going to be way more electronic waste because there's, I mean, cell phones, for example, in the developing world, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, production is up like 100% every other year. But we think that there's going to be a lot more e-waste in the future. We think that recycling isn't prevalent now, but with the legal requirements, it will become so. And so having a 10-year, 20-year head start, having built up these programs, we think that Apple is going to be in a really good position later on because you're going to be able to use these facilities you've built once everybody else is scrambling to find somebody to process these when the regulations set in, so that you're able to make a significant profit because they need somebody to process the materials.
My last question is, are you aware of any pending legislation? You mentioned some legislation that's been passed previously, and I liked your example of what's effectively outdated legislation that was aimed at solid state, or not solid state, but analog component electronics. Is there any other pending legislation, either on the state or federal level in the US, that addresses this issue, or could become problematic for Apple?
Only legislation that is what I mentioned before, which is the SEERA, the Secure E-Waste and Export Recycling Act. That is one of the major components that's trying to be passed right now, but it continually just gets stopped in the Senate. Every single year it gets passed in the House, but it's yet been proposed and passed in the Senate. That's one and only of really one of the initiatives that the United States is looking for right now.
Okay. Would you know, has Apple commented publicly or in congressional record as far as where they are on that legislation?
No,
I don't.
I don't.
Oh, go ahead.
You can go ahead. I don't think Apple has made a public comment about what it would take to actually implement it and the implications about what it would do. No.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. How about for those are the only questions I have. Thanks.
This is Carl Oliver. I'm looking at the global view of the recycling business, where some nations are exporting e-waste and other nations are importing e-waste. And the importers apparently are doing that perhaps to earn profit for their nations. And I'm wondering how they're going to react to the US trying to take away part of that market share from them. You have any thoughts about that?
I think two things are potentially important here. First of all, I do agree that it's important to keep a lot of this work in the developing world to the extent that it does make up a significant opportunity for economic development. So our proposal does do that in the sense that it increases programs in places like Uganda and Latin America, where there are significant economic opportunities. But onto the point, I'm presuming that probably the biggest competitor would be China. And that would be the country who's most likely to be upset with this. The reason why I don't think that's too concerning right now is there does not appear to be much of an effort by the Chinese government or the Chinese press to sort of support the way e-waste recycling is done in China. In other words, I mean, while looking at this research, there was actually a pretty searing article in the South China Morning Post that basically disavowed a lot of the programs going on in Guiyu and actually made it very clear that some of the rollbacks that had happened there in new regulations were very helpful. So I don't think it's obvious that China is, and many of the countries that are producing the e-waste who won't continue to benefit in our solution, I don't think that it's obvious that many of these countries are particularly proud of their role. I think that it's sort of extra governmental. I mean, I believe in China, it's actually illegal, most of the activities. And so a lot of this is black market sort of done under the radar. And so I don't think that the governments are necessarily going to be very upset. And I don't think the black market dealers have a ton of leverage if they're not being contracted anymore. So I think thankfully there won't be significant problems with international relations.
Are you telling me that China has turned off the welcome sign for e-waste?
I mean, right now, the importation that's happening right now is illegal, which is why all of the sort of 40% number where it's supposed to be done in the United States, but it's doing it in China, that's being done via trafficking, which goes through Hong Kong and then via bribes is transferred into the mainland of China. So right now, a vast majority of this processing is under their radar, super illegal, but the governments aren't doing a ton about it because there's other priorities right now. So I don't think that this is a particular, yeah. So right now, these governments are not particularly proud of what's going on. They just have other priorities they're trying to work for right now.
So are you telling me that our company is knowingly sending e-waste to China in violation of law or out of compliance with the law?
No. Not knowingly. Again, we agree that right now, we don't think that Apple is necessarily doing anything horribly wrong right now. The trouble, though, is because you're contracting this out and because those third-party contractors are doing things wrong, indirectly, Apple is causing a lot of these harms. And so even though we agree that you guys aren't doing anything, you're not actively exporting it illegally right now, and we applaud you guys for not doing that. But right now, because you're sort of focused on other things and letting this third-party contracting going on, almost unwittingly, this stuff is happening. So we don't think that necessarily right now you're doing anything illegal, but you're facilitating illegal activities by not taking action. And so we think that now's the time to sort of step up, make sure you're no longer facilitating those activities.
I'd just like to reiterate what Christopher was saying is that we're not accusing you guys of actually exploiting that law right now. It is yet to be passed, the SIRA or the Resource Conservation Recovery Act. It is yet to be passed. So you are still in compliance with the United States law. We are saying that is a high possibility in the future that you will not be in compliance.
And additionally, it's just good to be ahead of it before it blows back, just to avoid reputational damage.
I'd like to ask some questions on the financial aspect of your proposed solution. So you mentioned partnering with Unido and using their factories. Is there a cost involved in that? And what are our potential costs involved and then building our own factories? And you mentioned that there could be a positive financial impact if we were able to charge other companies to recycle their waste. But just trying to get a better hold on the financials around that.
So I think with the United, there may be some cost. We're not entirely sure about that. That would depend on whatever negotiations happen between Apple and Unido. I don't imagine the cost. It's possible there are no costs or the cost is not prohibitive, because right now you have these these companies Unido promoting these factories in the developing world for use. Like fundamentally, it's building these factories for them to be used. And so right now it's not necessarily clear like what the contracting is going to be. So I'm sorry, I'm getting somewhat sidetracked, but the fundamental point is I don't think that the cost is going to be prohibitive to initially start it up. I don't know the exact number, but I don't think that would be prohibitive. And then additionally, although it will cost money to produce and operate the facilities, what is important to remember is right now you're paying for domestic contractors, but many of them are not processing the waste domestically. But regardless, you're still paying for the domestic prices, which means that the prices are likely going to be very high, given that you're likely going to be charged more in the developed world than the developing world. So we think that the cost of operating a facility in terms of wages, in terms of labor, in terms of all of that is going to be lower in the developing world than the developed world. And so because you're effectively ditching all of these contractors to do this project, you're also opening up all the funds that you're spending on the contractors right now, which are likely way higher than they're using because they have the facade of being operated in the United States. And so they're able to charge much higher prices.
I'd like to ask a question about competitive advantage. Here at Apple, we pride ourselves on being extremely competitive and very profitable. I think it was Noor who mentioned in her presentation that if we were to participate in this closed loop waste solution, that it would, if I'm quoting her correctly, would give us a competitive advantage in the tech industry. I get how we can, will help the environment, but how will we gain a technical advantage in the tech industry by doing these things? Did you hear the question?
One way you would gain a technical advantage is because since as of right now, it's not a very pressing issue, and probably our other competitors are probably gaining or focusing on other things. By Apple going ahead of the game and doing it ahead of time, they will have these factories already implemented, while the other competitors are still going to have to make a plan, think ahead, figure it out, while Apple already has it all done.
So you're saying that would be our advantage, and that would be first? Would that be the advantage in the tech industry? Okay, thank you.
And then we'll also add, again, we also have the issue with greenwashing, where consumers are less likely to buy products if they don't believe the company is credible. And so we think there's an additional competitive advantage if legislation gets passed and other companies are now looking, like it's clear they're using contractors, they have to change their entire supply chain. News is coming out every day that, Samsung is having to change their entire supply chain because they're contracting out all of this work. Meanwhile, Apple has already done this. And so in 10 years, when this goes down, consumers who want to buy a phone that's, good for the environment, good for workers, are going to look at, Samsung or Google and say, well, they're doing all of this sketchy contracting. All of this news is coming out about them, but Apple looks pretty good. Let's go with Apple.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's pause the simulation and let's discuss some feedback. First of all, for the Wisconsin team, great topic. Not only a timely topic in terms of issues facing the world and in the future, but certainly as well because it provides a remarkable contrast with what I understand to be the public image Apple has worked hard to foster, and Apple being really the poster child of corporate America in particular, the ability to develop, implement, and be successful by a competitive advantage that's driven by technology, and most importantly by being recognized and valued by folks that are part of the generations that you're part of as well. It is an enormously, profoundly important issue, of course, and it's one that other industries have struggled with and really been challenged by historically. I worked in the nuclear power industry. I worked in the chemical industry. Both of those industries have long deserved, but unfortunately also long-term liabilities in terms of their public perception because of their inability to manage waste streams and or threaten the environment. Those things will only become, of course, more important in the future. But this significant issue is certainly quite a contrast with what otherwise Apple would like their public brand and their reputation and their brand image to be, not only in the US, but in other parts of the world as well. So excellent choice of topic, really good. The questions about how this could be a source of competitive advantage for Apple, I think were certainly intriguing. And I appreciate the effort you've made to recognize, that this implies not only to industrial waste, but also the ability to recycle and make the most of what are otherwise precious components that are part of the electronic supply chain. Christopher, you discussed, rare metals and rare earth elements being part of what's consumed. But I think, the issues you mentioned were really good. One thing I was curious about, besides the obvious public image and reputation Apple has nurtured over the years, I was curious if there were any statements that Apple has made publicly in shareholder records or on their website or other public documents that reflect a commitment that they otherwise are contradicting by neglecting this issue. Otherwise, Apple, like so many companies with complex supply chains, also has complex disposal chains. And that's reflected by the fact that much of the electronic waste that's generated in the US is being exported to other places where it's effectively out of sight and out of mind if I sort of follow. So really good topic. I think there may have been an opportunity to develop more of an economic model or recognize what may have been more sort of the cost advantage and benefit to Apple financially by taking on this issue, but certainly mitigating the consequences of what otherwise could be, substantial, permanent, and lasting harm to their brand image is a strong argument. So I thought you guys did a real good job at developing the problem, identifying some of the related and second or tertiary issues involved with it. Indeed, Mother Earth can only absorb so much more abuse. How about for the other judges? Any other thoughts or observations or for feedback?
I agree that there wasn't a lot of discussion about the financial implications. And I think someone mentioned that a figure of $1.9 million as a result of recycling, which is a small amount. Apple is a huge company. So this is not going to be a money maker for them. But I think it certainly would enhance their public image and promote brand appreciation. And it seems to me that a company like Apple, that's important to them. And as you know, that in every balance sheet, there's a line for goodwill. And I would think that they would be very cognizant if they were to embrace this closed loop and promote it as part of their branding, particularly for the younger generation who's going to be buying this equipment. I think that would be very important. I would like it, I don't know if you can do it, but if you could, to put some kind of a number on that. So when all the stakeholders and all the shareholders, it'll give them a better idea about, yeah, we want to be good citizens, but it also makes sense from a business perspective.
Well, here's my my comment here. I thought you were very strong starting out with stakeholder theory and building your presentation around stakeholder theory. Kudos for that. I think you ran into a tone problem where much of the time you were telling the board of directors that Apple was doing things wrong. And I think you could turn that around and say, hey, we have identified some opportunities for Apple to grow.
Yeah.
For example, Apple has, and what I'm looking at least, 4 corporate values that you didn't talk about. But you did have Tim Cook adding essentially a 5th value that hasn't been recognized formally by the company apparently, and that is sustainability. So I would build on that. Here's an opportunity for Apple to follow Tim Cook's lead here and build on the sustainability value. And the way that we would do that is to do this partnership. Now, we don't know what this partnership is actually going to involve. We need to explore that. It's an area for exploration. We don't know what the finances are going to be. We have to explore that also. That gets around having to have hard numbers for what it's going to cost to do that. It's an opportunity for growth, and we have to explore that. So I come away with mixed feelings. I think you had the tone problem, but you have some basically fundamental good strengths here to work with. And that is a new corporate value and a way to implement that by partnering.
Carl, I'd like to, if I could piggyback on that just for a moment. You mentioned the tone issue, and really to all the participants, Christopher, Maya, Aiden, and Nord did a wonderful job, and you can tell you were well prepared. But it did seem at times that you were lecturing to us about what we were doing, as opposed to saying, here's an opportunity. Here's yet another opportunity for Apple to take the lead in a very important global initiative. The role really is to influence and persuade the board of directors to go in that direction. So that would be a suggestion that I would make as you go down the path here, is to see yourself more in the role of influencer and persuader, because it's the concept is, who will not agree with your concept? Everybody will.
Yeah, I think so. I think that it was also, I agree with Kevin. It was a great topic and a very, very difficult one, right? Because one of the things that you are asking companies to do is to forget about the quarterly profits and think about 5, 10, 20, 50 years down the line, which is very hard for corporations sometimes. So I think you chose a challenging topic to bring to a board of directors, but a very, very important one. I think that I agree with some of the things that my colleagues have said. I think in the future, perhaps remembering that the role is that you're talking to a board of directors. And so, tying it more to the actual that audience, rather than here are all the facts and here's all the information that we have, I think is really important. And then I also would suggest that, having a little bit more clarity on what the solution is and what the financial implications are, because that's really what a company is going to want to know, right? Like, what do you want us to do and what is it going to cost? And then, the legal implications, which were challenging for you, because as you all admitted, today, there are not a lot of regulations and laws and legislation. And so again, you're asking a company to look to the long term. So, one of the ways that you could approach that is by talking about, the history of Apple. And, we began in this year with a vision of this, and we want to make sure we're here in 30 years, like, to really, something that is a weakness, which is the fact that there aren't a lot of legislations right now, you can shift into a positive. So that's just some feedback kind of on the topic, but great topic. You guys did a great job. You did a good job of balancing, the various presenters. And I really liked how, I think, at least 3 of you all had the same background. I thought that was a really nice touch. Perhaps the 4th, you weren't able to get the background up or whatnot, but I thought that was really a nice touch, and you all, presented very, very professionally and looked great. One small, tiny little thing, and I know that you are college students, so this is something I'm just sharing for you for your future in your profession. Be careful about using things like you guys or you all, or using filler words, because when you do have an opportunity to come in front of an entity like a board of directors, there's definitely a sense of a kind of formality that has to happen. And so just a small little kind of guidance for your future. But other than that, I thought it was an excellent topic, and you guys were very well prepared. So thank you.
Absolutely.
And there, I just said you guys. It's hard. It's a hard habit to break. Trust me, it's very hard. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I just want to close by mentioning 2 things, and thanks to Maria and for Thomas for reminding me of this. You started out with a really compelling point, and that was this concept of a stakeholder versus a shareholder framework. That contradicts what I first encountered in business school, but but that's not important. The fact that it does contradict that and the way you began to develop that argument was compelling. It was really good. So that, and it's novel. So I like that. I like that argument and that framework for an argument. And it also sounds like how I think of Apple's brand and how Apple's board wants Apple's brand to the meaning it's going to have for not only consumers and users, but countries and societies, because Apple really is one of the few brands and few businesses that has that level of importance and dimension. And finally, it's important to note that as a group, you belong to a generation that unfortunately none of us here who are judges today does. We belong to older generations. And your generation, you value more things that are consistent with the topic we discussed today and those like them. It's an inherent element of your generation and where your values are different from ours. So, and it's also how Apple has been successful as a business. And unfortunately, this topic could be something which leads them astray if they don't address it. So really timely topic, very important. I really liked your stakeholder framework for basing your argument. And thanks for participating in IBECC. Well done. Okay, do you have any questions for the judges?
Well, first, before we even ask any questions, I want to thank everyone for judging us and you know, getting to hear what we said, because that's we're happy to have the opportunity, you know, to talk about this because we think it's a really important topic. Well, first, Nora, Aiden, Maya, do any of you have any questions?
I'm good.
All right, I feel like there was one in here somewhere. I wrote down all the feedback, but my handwriting is very bad, so we'll see if I can read what I wrote down. Wow. Yeah, so actually, yeah, so with the tone, because I know all of you mentioned tone, and I agree, there were times where I was kind of feeling like I was being too confrontational. I know this is kind of a broad question, but like, so I know you all talked about, you know, talking about opportunity and how, you know, certain challenges that are happening right now give Apple an opportunity to change. Do you have any other like sort of specific discussions for almost like word choice, or like, because I understand the idea of trying to be less confrontational, but I fear I'm struggling with kind of like how to implement it, because I feel like if I try to implement it, it doesn't necessarily come across that way.
I would say that in the presentation, my understanding is at the next level, you can't use your slides. And some of the pictures on the slides are very compelling. So what I would suggest, Christopher, is have something that's going to grab the attention of the audience. And maybe that's a very bold statement about here's the profile of a person who works in, you know, these places, the fields where they dump all the waste. Here's the life expectancy. Here's the scope of the problem, and try to really hit them between the eyes, get their attention. So now they're saying, wow, this is a pretty big problem. And then you could, among other things, lead into, well, here's the good news. Here's the opportunity. And here's how it is aligned with our belief systems and core values at Apple. And here's what we're going to do about it.
So my feedback or suggestion is maybe a little bit broader, not necessarily about word choice, although I think Tom made some good suggestions. But my feedback is a bit broader. When you are confronting an entity like a board of directors or leadership or whatever, with something that you believe that they are not doing right, the very first thing you do is talk about all the things that they are doing right, right? Because everybody likes to hear how wonderful they are. And then, you know, the way that you can then build on that to bring in the negative or bad things they're doing is by saying, and of course, with a track record of all these fabulous things and all this wonderful, you know, upholding our values that you're doing, this is another way that you can show that. And this is another way you can demonstrate your leadership and your, ethical behavior and whatnot. So, and I know I'm sounding a little condescending. Sorry, I'm not trying to. It's just, it's a little bit of the dance that you have to play when you're coming into a group of people that you are trying to convince to change their ways. So I think more of that upfront positivity, and then you can kind of tell. I was always taught to bring in a couple different pieces, right? Whether it's the pulling on the heartstrings, or whether it's the business angle or the financial angle or whatnot, and see who kind of what reverberates with the crowd, right? So, and then play on that, because at that point, that group of people is now engaged with you and they are receptive to what you're saying, rather than feeling like, oh, you're just coming here to bash me and tell me that I'm doing bad things. So, that's my general feedback, because this is a competition and I think you guys did great. And I am really proud of you all, because I know that you are lower classmen, where some of the other teams that you're going up against are made up of upperclassmen. And I know it does make a difference, right? It's a couple more years experience, right, in school. So kudos to you for taking this on. But really, this is I'm just kind of sharing this for you as you kind of go out in the world and have to break down barriers in business or whatever you choose to do in life.
As consultants, we went out to serve you, to look and see what third parties in the world, what their observations of Apple and the industry are. And some of these people that we've explored may be critics, they may be biased. Other people are legislators or government officials. And these are the things that we hear them saying about this issue. And they may or may not be correct, but this is what they're saying, what their perceptions are. That's a way to phrase some of the criticism. It isn't your criticism as consultants, it's other people's, it's what you're hearing.
Yeah, great point.